Good afternoon. Pleasure to welcome everyone to the February 9th, 2026 briefing, and to maybe get away from the snow and ice now for a little while. This particular briefing is for our regular meeting, which is Thursday, February 12th at 2026, and it's going to be actually held at 6 p.m. on this Thursday. Before we actually review the items for the agenda, we actually have two discussion items today in this briefing. The first is an affordable housing discussion. We're really pleased to have Tyler Mulligan here from the UNC School of Government. Thank you. Heard him present before, and he's excellent, and I'm looking forward to your presentation. And after that, we will discuss our legislative goals. So without that, before turning it over to County Manager Tyler, unless you want to say any introductory comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Commissioner, staff, and guests. Yes, our first agenda item, discussion item, will be affordable housing strategies and tools for counties. We are delighted to have Tyler Mulligan with us today. We've had a couple conversations with this board in regards to what the county can and cannot do in terms of affordable housing, and so we thought it would be helpful to bring in the state expert. Tyler Mulligan is a distinguished professor of public law and government and faculty lead of Development Finance Initiative at the School of Government, and so he is here to discuss with you all things affordable housing and certainly answer any questions that you may have. Thank you again, Mr. Mulligan, for being here, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about affordable housing. This is a topic that is not short on controversy, and so I need to start by saying just a quick thing about the School of Government. The school has three important values that you need to understand that helps you understand my perspective as I talk with you today. One is that we are nonpartisan. That makes perfect sense. Doesn't matter what the political composition of the board is. The School of Government is there to help any local government. The second one is tougher, and that's policy neutral. And what that means is I'm not here to sell you on a particular way to do affordable housing. I'm here to present options. And sometimes that can be a little tiring because instead of me trying to advocate for a particular way, I'm trying to show you everything you can do. But that's our role, is to open up your possibilities and then you all decide for your community what to do. The third one is responsive. And that kind of means two things. It means for any of you who have called me, we actually pick up the phone at School of Government. We're a very unusual academic institution, so we will pick up the phone for any of you if you have questions. That's something that we enjoy doing, and we feel it enriches what we teach and how we write. So the other part of responsive is that local governments, when they call and ask for help, we want to help. And so I created the Development Finance Initiative, or DFI, at the school. It's a program that just sits alongside local governments as they do public-private partnerships. And what's interesting that I've seen in the last 15 years since I started this program, we had a lot of downtown revitalization projects and historic rehabilitation projects, but in the last 5 years, most of our inquiries have been about affordable housing. So it's not surprising to me that you all are asking about affordable housing. So here's my plan for today. I am going to start with fundamentals. It's a little bit of vocabulary to make sure we're all on the same page and using the same terms so you understand what I'm trying to get across. Feel free to ask questions at any time. If you need clarification, just stop me. I'm used to that. We will have a Q&A period at the end, of course, but if you need to stop me at any points, feel free to. Once I've talked about the fundamentals, I'm going to give you a framework for thinking about how to make strategic decisions. So it'll be the different strategic approaches around affordable housing. Then I'll get into legal authority. So for those of you who need an extra cup of coffee for that, that's fine. We'll talk about the county's legal authority in particular. If you've heard me speak before, I've never really focused on counties in the way that I will today. Then, after we've figured out what our strategic framework is and we've talked about the legal authority, we'll go through some tools. Like, what kind of things can we do then, given the authority that we have? And then after I've talked through those tools in the context of your strategic decisions, Then I'll have a Q&A period. But again, ask me questions at any time. Any concerns about that agenda? Okay, let me proceed then. So the fundamentals. Affordable housing is one way to use the word, talk about housing, but there are other words that you may have heard as well, right? Missing middle, workforce housing. I've even heard terms like essential housing or attainable housing. These are all terms that are used by elected officials when talking with their residents. Makes perfect sense. You're trying to communicate to residents about this idea of what kind of housing you are trying to achieve, that you want in the community. But the problem is those terms have almost no meaning. So I need for us to drill down a little bit, because after you've talked to residents about the general idea of affordable housing or workforce housing or middle income housing or whatever terms you're using, you then need to turn around to staff and be able to give them clear strategic direction within your legal authority. And that's the point of my discussion today. So a few things about affordable housing. There are two types. There is income restricted housing, where there's some kind of contract in place usually that makes sure that whoever lives in that housing has no more than a certain income, that the rent is set at a rate that's affordable to the people who are living there, and that if the resident leaves, there's some sort of transfer control so that that housing isn't lost, that another low-income household can take advantage of that existing housing. So this, with a contract for income eligibility and affordability and transfer controls, that is one type of affordable housing. But there's another type, and you've got plenty of it in Forsyth. It's called naturally occurring affordable housing. It's not restricted in any way. The reason it's affordable is because of its location or its quality that causes its pricing, whether that's a rent or sale price, to be lower than other housing and makes it affordable. But it's not under contract. There are no income requirements. Anyone can live there, including higher income folks, if they are able to get into this naturally occurring, unrestricted, affordable housing. And of course, if a certain neighborhood becomes hot, the market becomes hot, the prices will go up, and it may not be affordable anymore because there is no contract. I want you to be aware of that. Our tool for dealing with that kind of housing is really code enforcement. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but I'm mostly going to focus over on the left-hand side of your screen for the contract-related affordable housing, because that's where your legal authority lies, primarily. And so we'll talk mostly about that, but I can answer questions about either. The other thing is the definition of affordable. The federal government has a definition. They say that if a household is spending more than 30% of their income on housing, they are cost burdened. So it used to be 25%, by the way, back in the day, and the federal government moved it up to 30%, decided that spending up to 30% was fine. Over 30% makes you cost burdened. And if you spend more than half of your income, you are what's called severely cost burdened. And the federal government keeps data on this. And so you can see there on the screen the housing costs that they include for renters or homeowners. It's the standard expenses you would expect. And that is a federal definition. But what you want to know about state law is that there is no affordability requirement in state law. If you all are involved in affordable housing, there is no requirement for it to be affordable to the people that live there. The statutes do say it needs to be within the financial reach. But the federal government, if you use federal money, they're going to make sure you don't get over that 30% of a person's income. But that's not the case under state law. If you're outside of the federal world and you're just dealing with your state authority, there is no affordability requirement. The other thing to get across is that housing cost is not the only thing you all will want to be looking at. So and primary one is availability. And, I've got on the screen here a picture of a single-family home and an apartment building. And many people think that that's the only two types of housing that there is either a big apartment building or a single-family house. And of course, that's not the case. I mean, my son's a new teacher, and he could not afford a single-family house. So he started in that apartment building, but he wanted to move out. He wanted to move into something that was sort of like a single-family house, townhome. So there are these other types of housing that exist. And the question is, does the county have a wide variety of housing to help people as they're at different stages in their lives? Speaking of stages of life, one of them is accessibility. So is your housing as the baby boomers they're retiring and they want to age in place, they want to stay in their community? Is there housing available if they can't live in that single-family house and mow the yard anymore? Do you have housing in the community that they can move to? That's one thing to look at. Adequacy is the age. How old is the housing in the county? Where is that older housing? Where is the newer housing? Understanding what mix you have. And then, of course, eviction rates are different from county to county. And that creates family instability that you might want to examine. So those are the things to look at. It's a busy slide. The question I'm asking here is, who is served by affordable housing? And this is a one-page infographic from the North Carolina Housing Coalition. They create these county profiles. This is Forsyth County's profile. I'm going to try to help focus by removing some. It's great information, but I want to focus in on something here. And that is this important term of area median income. You may already know this, but I want to make sure I'm clear on it from the very beginning. For those of you who aren't math majors, because I'm not, had to be explained to me, the area median is if you take every person's income that's received and you stack them in a pile from the person who receives the lowest income to the person who receives the highest income, the median income is the exact middle person's income. That means 50% of people earn less than that median income, and 50% of the people earn more than that median income. And that number is used by the federal government when determining income levels that are eligible for housing. And so 100% of the area median income in Forsyth, according to the federal government, is $67,165 that I have there on the screen. That's 100% of the area median income. But what federal programs do is they say, well, we don't need to help 50% of the people. We need to help those who are earning lower incomes. And they determine what low income is by saying 60% of the area median income. And I've just calculated that for you. I've taken 60% of that $67,000 and it's $40,000 or so. That is 60% of the area median income. And that is the level, if you've heard of low-income housing tax credit projects, that's a federally subsidized housing that uses that tax credit. It's private housing. You probably wouldn't even recognize that it is affordable housing because it looks just like every other apartment building, but they've used federal tax credits as part of the capital stack. I'll show you what that looks like in a bit. Or the Home Investment Partnership Program. Either one of these, they're using 60% of the area median income as their standard for who can live in that subsidized housing. And if I kind of bring out those, if you can see those salaries there, they're average salaries in Forsyth that are either teachers, childcare, or firefighters, just 3 examples. So if you look at that, who is eligible to live in a low-income housing tax credit project or a home-funded project? Well, childcare workers and firefighters, they seem to be able to make it, but your teachers seem to be above the threshold, don't they? I'm going to share another nuance with you. That is average salary, first of all. That's average for teachers. And so a new teacher makes much less. My son is a new teacher, makes much less than your average. And the final nuance on this for the federal government is when they talk about 60% of the area median income, they adjust it by household size. So if we have our teacher making $40,000, she doesn't seem to make the 60% area median income limit. But here's what the federal government does. They have a different number depending on the size of the household. So if she has 2 dependents, we move her over into that 3-person household category, and you can see $40,000 does get below the low income limit. So a new teacher with 2 dependents is going to qualify for most of that federally subsidized housing. The other reason you want to understand this area median income is that cost burden figure. It can help you to understand what your population, what your residents are facing by breaking down their housing experience by their income. And you can see this is a chart I created. I'm not very good with data. I'm a lawyer. But I was able to make this chart. You can see it shows who is cost burden, who is spending more than 30% of their income on housing. And you can see under 80% of the area median income, there are a lot of people who are cost burden. Less so over 80% of area median income, but that's the kind of data that we have to work with at the federal level. Going to move to the next thing here, which is the math problem. All this, again, is part of the fundamentals to help make sure we're all on the same page and learning here. I am talking about private affordable housing. Counties don't have enough money to build and basically provide all the affordable housing that's needed in a community. And so you're using private affordable housing in most cases. A low-income housing tax credit project is private. Even though it's subsidized by the federal government, it's privately owned. So I want you to understand what the private housing math problem is. Let's do a little home ownership math, which will probably feel very familiar to you. That teacher making $40,000, depending on her credit score, depending on what the circumstances are, interest rates, I've estimated here can make a maximum payment of $1,100 a month for a mortgage. If take that $1,100 to a bank, the bank will say, well, a potential mortgage is $145,000 with that sort of income. And if you can scrap together $4,000, if we can get a fairly reasonable low down payment mortgage, the total that this household can afford to buy out in the market is a $149,000 house. That's the demand side. Those are the people who are trying to live in housing. So then we look at the supply side. Who's providing the housing? So some of that housing on the supply side is already existing housing, right? That just like this house right here, listed at $179,000, 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,600 square feet. It's not extravagant. It's a moderate house, but it is still out of the price range of this household. So this 4-person household, the teacher, she's not going to be able to afford this particular house. So maybe you might say, well, let's make new housing. So I've got a cartoonish one there because it doesn't exist yet. Let's make new housing. Well, that's expensive. I've just given the averages that we have seen. This is actually a little old too. $20,000 for land, construction about $220,000, and then the profit of 20%. Even your nonprofits need a profit because that pays for their administration, pays for central office and their marketing and everything that they have to do behind the scenes. And that comes out to $288,000. That's significantly more than this household could afford. And so that's the home ownership math problem. We'll get back and talk about how to address that in various ways toward the end. Now I want to take you into the multifamily or apartment buildings, which the financing there is a little different. I represent it differently here because we talk about capital stacks. And so I've got a 60-unit development that costs $13 million to build. You can see I've got a $1,500 monthly rent that the developer is modeling. And if the developer is able to collect from all 60 units $1,500 and they pays expenses, at the end they have a net operating income of $940,000. The developer can estimate that. So the developer takes that, I make $940,000 a year with this housing project, and they go to a bank. And they say, with $940,000 bank, what kind of loan can you give me so that I can actually construct this housing? And the bank will say, well, $940,000, let's take a look. We can give you a loan of $10.7 million. Now, the banks make calculations just like they do for you for a home mortgage, right? They don't maximize the mortgage payment so it meets your income level. They do the same thing with an apartment building. They say, well, great that you make $940,000, but safely, you're going to have to keep your payments down to around $800,000. And so they get to a $10.7 million loan. That does not provide all the financing that this apartment building needs. So the developer knows this, calculates out the estimated annual payments for the loan, and at the end of that, has $190,000 left over. So what the apartment owner does at that point is turns around and says, all right, my bank has given me $10.7 million, but I need more. I'm going to go to investors. And investors require a return. And if I say I've got $190,000 that I can give you every year, how much equity will you give me today to build this apartment building that will then provide that income stream? And in a market rate apartment building, the equity investors will probably say $190,000, great, I'll give you $2.3 million, and that rounds out the capital you need to build this apartment building. That's market rate. So now let's look at what happens when it needs to be affordable. In that case, the rent is needed to be at $650 to be affordable to low-income folks. It's still a rent. It's not zero. It's not free. But it is heavily subsidized. And so if you can only bring $650, you'll only collect $650 from all 60 units. And then you pay for your expenses. It costs the same thing to run a low-income housing tax credit project as it does to run a market rate project. Same expenses. At the end of the day, you only have $350,000 in income. And so the affordable housing developer will turn around and go to a bank and say, all right, bank, I've got $350,000. What kind of loan can you give me? And the bank will say, well, $5 million. Great. And that calculate out how much debt service payments are required. And at the end of the year, after paying that, they have $45,000 left over that they can take to investors and say to investors, just like the market rate housing did, if I have $45,000 to give you every year, how much equity will you pay me today to build this building? And they'll say, oh, a little over $500,000, which leaves an enormous gap. And that just makes sense, right? The rents are lower, and so not enough income is coming in, so you can't get as large of a loan, and the investors aren't going to provide as much equity. And so there's a gap. So we have two issues with affordable housing. One is that the rents aren't high enough to obtain enough financing for construction. You'd have to get up to that higher level of $1,500. That's why if you've seen apartment buildings constructed in your community lately, some of their rents are around $2,000 because that's what they must charge in order to get enough money to build the building in the first place. Affordable housing is much lower, obviously, so can't get that kind of capital. So then developers turn to other sources for that gap. And the main one they look at today is the low-income housing tax credit. You'll hear me say LIHTC, but you need to be aware of how LIHTC works because the subsidy is substantial and you all don't have the resources to fill that gap all by yourselves. You want developers to identify this low-income housing tax credit and put it to work. They're private developers. You want these private apartment buildings to be created in your community, obviously in places where your zoning allows. So you can see I've gotten the chart there. The low-income housing tax credit is really the way that subsidized affordable housing is created for the workforce today. Section 8, public housing, USDA, they've all flattened out. The thing is, for a developer to get low-income housing tax credits and fill that gap so that you don't have to fill it, they can only build in good neighborhoods. They have to be close to grocery stores. They have to be close to pharmacy and shopping. The neighborhood has to be good and safe. There has to be bus and transit nearby. There has to be, it can't have any of these incompatible, uses like a wastewater treatment plant next door or active railroad tracks. And it has to be visible like any other market rate apartment building. These rules are set by a state agency called the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. They decide who NCHFA, North Carolina Housing Finance Agency, they decide which developers get to use this tax credit to build housing in each county. And they try to distribute it across the county. So Forsyth is going to get some every single year, a new low-income housing tax credit project. But it'll have to meet these rules and be in these good neighborhoods and away from incompatible uses. The other reason that local governments often want to see the use of a low-income housing tax credit to fill that gap, not just so that you don't have to worry about filling that gap, but also because the Housing Finance Agency will continue to monitor that housing for the next 30 years to make sure that that housing is safe and decent during that 30-year period, and that the people who live there are income qualified. So that teacher with 2 dependents, that she is qualified to be in that housing. That's the math problem. That's how we address the math problem. I haven't yet gone into county tools. Just want to take a minute. Now what I'm going to do is provide you a framework for thinking about and discussing with each other what your priorities are around housing. Give you some terms and a way to think about it. These are the strategic approaches. I set it up as 2 different, kind of on a Cartesian grid, 2 different spectra. One is preservation. You have that naturally occurring affordable housing. It's already affordable, but it's maybe aging. Its location might not be great, but at least it's affordable. You may want to look at whether to preserve the housing you've got. Because if you start losing housing you've already got, then even if you produce a bunch of new housing, the loss of your aging housing can outpace what developers can produce anew. And so it's a balance. I don't know what that balance is in Forsyth, but thinking about the difference between preserving what you've got and producing new is one of the spectrums you need to think about. Another one that you all will discuss and will be based on what you and your residents' values are is whether you prefer wealth building or ongoing affordability. Now, when I say wealth building, that's the American dream. You own a house. Over time, you build equity in that house, and when you sell it, you've built some wealth. You've built a little bit of equity. Maybe you can get a home equity line in order to send kids to college. The point is, home ownership has long been seen as a wealth building opportunity for people who own homes. If that's your priority, which is up to you to decide, then you might be thinking about how do we get low and moderate income people into homes that they own. The only issue with that is if you provide things like a down payment assistance for a low income or moderate income household to get into a home that they own, that when they decide to move, that house is no longer going to be affordable. If they sell it and there are no restrictions on it, it's not affordable. So it doesn't stay affordable for the next household. It's sold at whatever the market price is. The other side of the spectrum is ongoing affordability. If you say it's wonderful to have wealth building, but at the same time, low and moderate income people also need low cost rental housing. And the good thing about rental housing is that if we, as a city, county, or state, invest in that housing today, If it's rental, it will stay affordable year after year. So when one tenant moves out, another tenant can move in. We don't lose the affordability. We keep it for as long as we need. So that would be the ongoing affordability. So I put this on a grid, and these are your choices, and this is how I'm going to talk through the tools that are available to you after I've talked about legal authority. So on this grid, if you can see that, if you are focused on wealth building, so you want home ownership, if on the preservation side, you'd look to preserve the existing home ownership opportunities that you have in the county. If you prefer to build new housing, you would be looking at new production of single family or affordable home ownership, could be townhomes. If you are on the ongoing affordability side, you'd be looking at rentals, whether you are preserving existing rental product in your community or producing new. And I can't tell you where you might want to be on this grid here. That's for you all to decide and then communicate to staff. Our priority is preserving home ownership, or our priority is to produce new rentals. That's a decision for you all to make. And then staff translates that into an actionable policy, but within legal authority. So here's the legal authority part. I need to take you back in history just a little bit. I hope I'm not losing you here, going to history. That's FDR, in Great Depression. And the National Housing Act of 1934 was signed basically to allow municipal corporations to basically take out loans and create housing for persons of low income. And what North Carolina did in order to take advantage of that national legislation is North Carolina enacted that 1935 Housing Authorities Law. That law is still around today. So in 1935, they enacted that law to take advantage of this, the Housing Act of 1934, the Housing Act of 1937, and multiple housing acts that were brought out by Congress year after year. But notice they're all about persons of low income, the low rent housing, lower income groups. It's generally what the federal policy has focused on. And so here's what North Carolina did. They created that Housing Authorities Law. And what that did, and this is important, it's going to become important to what your county authority is. So this this state legislation allowed local governments to create separate bodies called housing authorities, separate corporate bodies. And either the commission or the city council would appoint people to this separate body. That separate body, that housing authority, would receive money from the federal government and then use that money to build housing and manage it. But it was kept separate from the city or separate from the county. You had to create this separate body to receive this money from the federal government. These housing authorities, limited as they were to use the federal dollars, still had a lot of powers, development powers. So they were focused on providing housing for low and moderate income, or LMI. I might accidentally say LMI instead of low and moderate income. They could offer rent subsidies only for low income people. And their powers, they could acquire land. They could prepare that land. They could construct new buildings. They could construct housing. And they could sell land and housing. And importantly, they were given the ability to offer grants, loans, interest supplements, and other financial assistance to low-income people who were trying to get into housing. That language, grants, loans, and other programs of financial assistance, is important because counties don't have that power, and I'll explain in just a moment. Well, back in the 1935 when this was enacted, it was challenged almost right away by unhappy taxpayers who said this is not the role of government to be messing around in the private housing market. We ought to leave housing to the private sector. And the Supreme Court of North Carolina back then said, well, wait, we have in our state constitution a duty to take care of the poor, the unfortunate, and the orphan. That's in our constitution. You can't make donations. You can't donate land or donate money to housing organizations. But you can support low-income people and the poor. And they said it is okay for a county or a city or a housing authority to get involved in the private housing market when decent housing is not already available and the private sector can't meet the need. So that's where that federal data comes back, is looking at federal data to see, can the county say this? Can the county say that private enterprise is not meeting the need for affordable housing in Forsyth County? I showed you that chart earlier. I think an argument can be made that low-income people are having trouble. They are cost burdened, but that's for you to decide. I think you meet the legal requirement, though, for private enterprise not meeting the need of low-income people. Later on, there was also a policy to help moderate income people. And the court was asked, wait, we know we can help poor people, but what about moderate income people, just above poverty, low income? And the court said, if moderate income people are suffering from the exact same causes and there's no housing for them either, then you can help moderate income people too. So let me, most simply, what does that mean? Low income is defined in North Carolina as those earning 60% of area median income or below. That 60% of area median income may sound familiar because that's the same standard for low-income housing tax credits and home investment partnership funds. 60% of area median income is defined in state law as low income. That is who cities and counties and housing authorities are authorized to support. And if there's a need shown, they can go all the way up to 80% of area median income. That's moderate income. So if need is shown, and if I looked at that chart, it does appear that people all the way up to 80% of area median income, there's a large number who are having trouble affording their homes. That's a call for you all, but I think you meet the legal standard. This is the law in its simplest form. If I were to leave you with anything, it's understanding this difference between the 60% area median income and the 80% area median income. But there's a little county nuance that I need to share with you. Remember I told you that housing authorities were created as separate bodies? Well, cities and counties were not allowed to use any of those powers of a housing authority to acquire property, prepare that property, sell that property, construct their own housing. Housing authorities could do it, but cities and counties could not unless they held a public referendum approving expenditures for that purpose. Now, that was in 1975 that cities and counties were first given even the option, 40 years later, first given the option to exercise the powers of a housing authority so long as they held a public referendum first. That was 1975. You can see that's Governor Jim Holshouser there. 1983, new governor, Governor Jim Hunt. Cities went and lobbied and said, hey, wait a second, General Assembly. If we use sales tax revenue only, can we use that money without having to hold a public referendum? And the General Assembly said, sure, and gave them the authority, if they use sales tax revenue, to not hold a public referendum if they're spending money on housing, just like a housing authority. 1985, new governor, Governor Jim Martin. Cities went back to the General Assembly and said, why do we even have this public referendum requirement? Why don't we just get rid of that? And the General Assembly did get rid of it. So cities can use all the powers of a housing authority, and they don't have to hold a public referendum before spending money on that. It wasn't until 1999. Governor Jim Hunt comes back, by the way. County relief. Counties say, can we just have a little something, please? Cities have been completely, they don't even have a public referendum requirement. And the General Assembly said, well, okay, we'll give you some powers. And they made a special statute of county powers that allows you to make projects that are entirely for low and moderate income people. So you can't have a single person who is above 80% area median income in one of those projects. either has to be owned by the county or conveyed at fair market value, because what they did not include in your special county powers was that phrase that housing authorities get to use, which is grants, loans, interest supplements, and other programs of financial assistance. They did not give that to counties. So if counties want to subsidize housing with loans or grants or programs of financial assistance, there are two ways you're legally authorized to do it. You either use non-state or non-local funds, which is federal funding usually, or private donations, or you must hold a public referendum. So you do have options, but they are limited. And one more, notice that all the governors were Jims, by the way. All of them were Jims. I just find that humorous. This is a complicated chart. I don't plan to sit on this chart. You have that in your materials, but bringing it down to simplicity. If you would like to, as a county, subsidize housing or participate in housing where some higher income people are in there too. If you believe in mixed income, where you think middle income people should be living with low income people and moderate income people at the same time, and you don't want to build housing that's only for low and moderate income people, it's providing subsidy or getting outside that all low and moderate income bubble, that requires using federal or private donations, non-state, non-local, or holding that public referendum. I'm going to go very fast through this. So you know, counties did not even get authority to do general obligation bonds for housing until 1999, and the authority is different. You can see on the slide. I'm not going to spend time on that, but the authority that counties have to approve general obligation bonds for housing are different than the authority that cities have. But I bring you back to the basics. Low income is 60% of the area median income. And you can even help all the way up to 80% area median income if a need is shown. All right, let's put this all together, and I'm looking at the time. Got the legal authority. We have these strategic approaches. Let's take a look at how each strategy would be used by the county if these were ways you wanted to go. If you are thinking about housing preservation and you are interested in wealth building, meaning home ownership, if you're on the home ownership side and you want to preserve existing home ownership, I recommend carrots, and you might think I'd say sticks, but I say code enforcement. Carrots and code enforcement are your tools. The carrots for rehab of existing home ownership is not something that Forsyth can do without a referendum. But there are federal programs administered by the state for weatherization, improvements to energy efficiency of low-income housing, rehab and repair programs, and foreclosure prevention. So that preserves the home ownership that you've already got in the county. See the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency for those resources. Unfortunately, to do those kind of programs as a county, until you reach a population of 400,000 in the census, you're required to hold a referendum before you can do that sort of rehabilitation. You were at 390 in the last census, so you'll get there in 2030, no doubt, but you're not quite at 400,000. Code enforcement, I don't want to focus too much on this, but existing housing, if it is vacant, if you're concerned about code enforcement when there's a family living there, that's understandable. But if it's vacant, most policy makers, they suggest that you can foreclose on that property earlier if it's vacant and make sure it gets into the hands of someone who will actually make sure it's occupied, instead of letting it sit for 8 years until the county finally forecloses on it for delinquent taxes or something else. I'm going to keep going, but I will say this. If you foreclose on a tax delinquent property, and if you also bid to buy that property in the foreclosure auction that occurs, and you win that bid, you may turn around and sell that property to anyone of your choice at a price no less than the bid that you won. So if you buy housing at foreclosure for a pretty low price, you could turn around and sell that to a nonprofit. You could turn around that and sell that to a developer at the price that you paid to buy that house. And that does not require a referendum. That's a totally different kind of authority. It's outside of the housing authority's law. So I did want to share that. That does not involve subsidy. If you're interested in code enforcement, back in 2019, there was a study done for the city of Winston-Salem. Feel free to take a look at that. If you are trying to build new homes, and let me check my time here. I think I've got about 5 minutes left here. If you are trying to build new homes, there are two ways you can handle it. You either go to the demand side, which is helping the households who are trying to get into housing. And the way that's typically done is credit repair to help them qualify for a larger loan, or down payment assistance to help them put down the down payment. If I bring back this slide here where I show the math problem, credit repair might get this teacher's loan up to $170,000 with a down payment program that the state already administers through the Housing Finance Agency of $15,000. We can get her up to a house that's $186,000. She would be able to afford that existing house I'd shown you earlier. She still wouldn't be able to afford a new house. We also think about helping developers, and I know that counties have limited authority, but what could you do? Well, you are empowered to construct housing yourself and convey it directly to low and moderate income households. You can engage in construction yourselves. I've already mentioned you can sell tax foreclosure property at the price that was paid by the county. And you can also use some zoning powers. If there are, zoning is controversial at a county level, but the conditional zoning power that even counties hold is substantial. And if your comprehensive plan says that affordable housing is needed, then it is possible to create conditional zoning. And conditional zoning means the developer has to negotiate with the county about meeting the impacts of that particular development. Affordable requirements can be included in that. I don't know how long counties will have conditional zoning powers. The General Assembly can take them away at any time. But for now, conditional zoning districts do have a limited power if your comprehensive plan already says something about affordable housing. That's not subsidized. That's just your zoning power. You also have the ability to provide for the public infrastructure. And that's not requiring a public referendum, because you have separate power to build water and sewer and do utility extensions. So you already have that power, and it does not involve a referendum. So you could imagine a conditional zoning district where the developer's negotiating with you, and you say there needs to be affordable housing in your development. And if you do, the county will help pay for the public-owned stuff. It's county anyway. It's county water or it's county sewer. You could pay for your own stuff. Typically, we make developers pay for the county stuff, but you could pay for it in what's called a reimbursement agreement. Question about your zoning powers. A community land trust, I'm going to skip through. If you've heard of this, we can talk about it in the Q&A. But if you were able to subsidize the land, provide public infrastructure, the profit 20% is 20% of a smaller amount, maybe you get that new house down to $225,000. Still not quite what the teacher can do, and that's where private donations sometimes come in. But those are your home ownership opportunities. Very quickly to finish up, what about rental? If you're interested in ongoing affordability. For preservation, you have low-income housing tax credit projects throughout the county. Identify them. Find out when their requirements, their income restrictions are going to expire. The low-income housing tax credit program was created in 1986, and there's a 30-year or so income restriction requirement on those. So some of them are starting to get to the end of their income requirements. It could be the case that you could acquire those and then sell them to someone who agrees to keep them affordable. Or you could simply negotiate a right of first refusal. So it's identifying your existing housing and preserving it. You can also use carrots and code enforcement, but you might save that for 2030 when you hit 400,000 on the census. Then finally, my very last section here is, what about new rental units? Well, one thing you can do is to help the resident, which is rental subsidy, but that requires a referendum in order to do that. On the developer side, helping developers to build affordable housing, you can sell your public land to someone who agrees to build low and moderate income housing, but you can't subsidize it. You can't do it at a discount. It would be fair value. We've already talked about selling tax foreclosure property at the price that you win the bid, the price you paid. And of course, you are authorized to construct and manage your own housing, but that is a lift. That's a real big lift for your staff. And then I've talked about conditional zoning as another power, and the ability for you to pay for public infrastructure, water, sewer, publicly owned stuff. And then I ask one question too: if you have neighborhoods that you're concerned about, you can wait. You can wait for developers to assemble land, find the vacant parcels, the vacant properties, put them together, and the developer brings a plan forward to develop them. That's great. They have a really hard time with heir property. So heir property is where someone dies without a will, and the state requirement is that the house goes up to the parents and out to all the brothers, sisters, cousins, the whole thing. And so now there are 30 people who own a single house. You may have heard of heirs property. Developers have a real hard time getting heirs property. It's just too expensive. And so oftentimes governments have to do that work to unlock heirs property. And if you already own housing because you've been doing tax foreclosures, you may own housing you're not even aware of. Or you may own vacant land, undeveloped land that could be assembled and made available to low and moderate income housing developers. Can't make subsidies because that would require a referendum, but half the battle is simply reserving the housing for low and moderate income people, not necessarily making it cheaper. Okay, and so there's the strategic framework and the different tools. It'd be time for Q&A, if I haven't lost you, or if we don't have time. How much time did I use, Chantel?
Do any of you have questions?
Yes.
Okay,
Go ahead. No, you first.
go ahead, Dan.
Thank you. Yes, sir, I've got 3 questions. If we do a public referendum, do we have to include a bond? Do we have to include a specific amount, or can we simply do a public referendum for authority?
For a program? That's a great question. So you don't, when I say public referendum, I'm not talking about a bond referendum. I'm talking about an expenditure referendum. And I have not seen one that doesn't include an amount. But could you authorize a program and say, we're going to do a program of down payment assistance for low-income households and not include an amount? I think is a question I'm not sure. I would not say right here, right now, yes, you can do it without an amount. I think an amount would be required because it is an expenditure authorization.
Can you check on that for us?
I will.
Thank you. Second question is, my understanding that the rehab funds that we presently administer, that are coming ultimately from the federal government,
Yes.
do include matching funds requirements. Now, that matching fund, are they restricted in our source of those funds, or are we allowed through some loophole to utilize local revenues for the matching funds?
I'm not aware of a loophole that allows you to use to make your matching funds from any source. I think it's still subject to that public referendum requirement. So it could be donations, could be other federal funds. Sometimes federal money can be used to match other federal money, but not often. So yes, there would need to be a referendum for the matching funds.
Okay. Mr. Attorney, what source have we been using for the matching funds?
So my understanding is there is a match required. However, we are paid from that money a greater amount for our own administration. So the net amount put in by the county is actually negative. We're not effectively matching. We're calling it a match, but we're taking more money out than we're putting in.
If I may add something too, sometimes matches for the federal government can be in kind. I'm not familiar with your very specific matching requirements, but having staff time devoted to administering housing programs is different than providing grants, loans, or interest supplements or financial assistance. So I believe that if the match is in staff time, in-kind staff time, that's going to be perfectly permissible.
Okay. Third question, and this, then I'll pass the mic.
Sure.
If we sell property, is that funding available for, say, again, for example, the rehabilitation program? Or does that immediately become local revenues then that have the same restrictions accompanying it?
Yeah, it's the latter. So whenever revenues come into the county, it goes into the treasury, and it can only be removed from the treasury by operation of law. And so revenues coming in are treated differently than the expenditures going out, and we typically cannot tie those two together.
All right, so then private donations would have to come in with the restriction on how they were used. Would that be a fair?
No, I don't think so. I think if someone gave you a private donation and said, here's $1 million, use it however you'd like, county, I think you would then say, this is non-state, non-local source. I see what you're saying. And it would be deposited in the treasury, but it did not come from tax revenues. And so it could be allocated for housing or any other purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Wilson.
Okay. Commissioner Bessie usually takes all my questions because he's a lawyer. But with regard to just the existing status in this state, and we've heard about Asheville, I believe, any county in this state or counties or municipalities that have held a referendum in this regard that passed?
They haven't held a referendum in a long time. So housing has not been an issue for my entire career at the School of Government for the last 17 years almost. However, it used to be something that was done long ago. Today, here's what's gone on recently. Because we received American Rescue Plan Act funds in the 2020s, we were flush with federal funding. There was no question about whether or not there was a need for a referendum because every local government in North Carolina, when they finally turned their attention to housing, had an abundance of federal replacement revenues. And so I have not seen a referendum approved recently, although Wake County is looking at it. Buncombe County is looking at it. So there are some counties that are now preparing for a referendum.
Okay. But otherwise, the answer is no currently.
Answer is no, though.
Okay.
But didn't Buncombe approve one in 2022?
Buncombe did not approve one of these expenditure referendums, not that I'm aware
Okay,
of.
but housing, they did a housing one.
They did a housing bond. Is what they did.
Second question, I know you're familiar with rent-controlled housing in urban areas like Manhattan, and say someone had a daughter in Manhattan who needed rent-controlled housing and it was procured, but the requirement was that an extreme amount of confidential financial information was required. I assume that was so they wouldn't lose any money if the daughter bolted. What do you think of those programs? I mean, I've read, they're pretty extensive, detailed programs. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll share my personal thoughts over beverage, but I will share that.
You're on.
Wait, great. What I would say is that's important for you to know is that rent control is prohibited in North Carolina.
Okay.
There's a specific statute that says it's not permitted. Now, when we talk about income restrictions and affordable housing, you might say, well, wait, isn't that a form of rent control? It is only authorized in North Carolina when there is a contract with the owner of the housing with subsidy that allows a state or local government to impose some sort of income eligibility or rent control restriction through that contract. So that's the only time it's allowed in North Carolina.
But it seems to work pretty well in Manhattan, from what I understand. You're laughing.
I am laughing because I've had a few, I've known some people who have also had to deal with rent control, and they believe what it does is they believe it prevents new housing from being built. Because then if it's rent controlled, then profits can't be made and therefore housing does not get built. But it is a policy I haven't had to think a lot about because it's not permitted in North Carolina. But just the economics of it, we'd want to think that through. If there was a limit, and I showed you the capital stack that's built by a developer of housing, if they know that there's an income limit, then when they go to the bank for a loan, their loan will be smaller. And when they go to the investors to try to get an equity investment, that equity investment will be limited because the rent that they can charge is limited. And so it could prevent folks from putting enough capital together to build housing in the first place.
Okay. Well, and I was only asking about the tenants, but I'll still take the beverage. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Other questions? Commissioner Woodbury?
Thank you so much for this information. I think that this has been super helpful for us as a county to try to figure out how to support our citizens that could, benefit from our support in affordable housing. So first, just thank you so much for coming to share this information. So I have two questions. One that kind of piggybacks off of Commissioner Bessie as it relates to, since we can't use proceeds from the sale of any of our property to help with affordable housing, what would be an option that we could use our property that we have that can possibly be repurposed for affordable housing?
Yeah. If you have housing, one of the things that prevents low-income housing from existing in the market is that it's not reserved for low-income people. Low-income people can't afford to pay for housing. But if there's a house that's affordable to a low-income person or a moderate-income person, a teacher, it's also affordable to someone who's earning middle income. And so if I'm a seller of a house and I have a choice between the person with higher credit or even a retiring person who's offering me cash to close on my house versus this moderate-income homeowner who's bringing me a mortgage that has to be qualified, and I got to make sure that they're okay, and it's going to be 3 months before we can close, or I can take this offer from the person who's offering cash. I'm going to take the higher income person who's able to offer cash. Half the battle sometimes is simply reserving the housing for low or moderate income people after it exists. And so you could take the property you own and say, we're going to sell this property, and you do have this ability. It is going to have to be at the value of that property. You're going to have to sell it. You can't give it away. But you will have put restrictions on it saying it can only be used for low-income housing. Once you put that restriction on it and you bring an appraiser to value that house, that property, that value is going to be lower because the value of property is based entirely on the income it can generate. And so if you've just told a piece of property that it can now no longer generate as much income because it's got to serve low-income people, the value of that property is going to go down. It's not going to be zero. It's not going to be zero. You're going to have to sell it at fair value. But that value, that fair value, is going to be lower, and that's not a subsidy. That's not a grant or a loan. And so it's within your power, and no referendum is required. Does that help?
Yeah. And then the second question, as it relates to, and this is probably, I can't figure out the sale tax foreclosure property at price paid by county. And so in my mind, generally those tax foreclosure properties go out and people bid on them. So am I on the right path of how that generally happens? People can bid and then the price will go up and now we're back at it. Oh, that's not affordable any longer because
Right. So the main function of that tool, I am taking a tool that's outside of the housing world, and I'm bringing it in and showing it to you as a possible tool for you to use. But it wasn't designed for housing. The real point of tax foreclosure is to try to generate as high a bid as you can so that your taxes are paid back. And then to put that in the hands of some new owner who is going to maintain that property or develop it or do whatever. I'm repurposing that statute, bringing it into the affordable housing context and saying, well, if there are certain areas of the county where you think it's on your water and your sewer line and you think that this is a great place to develop, and maybe if those properties come available, maybe you actually do put a bid instead of letting some private owner buy it. You just put in a bid. If you lose the bid because someone else bids higher, well, that's good for the county. Your taxes are paid off, and you've got some owner who's vested and now needs to make some money off of that house, that property that they just bought. But if it doesn't, if your bid wins, if the county bid wins, and the county ends up owning that property, well, now you can think about how you've assembled, how many other properties you may have acquired in this way. The county does not have to bid on foreclosure processes. You only have to bid if you think it's in your interest to do so. The counties often do bid because they want to set a floor so that other bidders will have to go above it and pay back the taxes. Sometimes counties, nobody else bids higher, and the county ends up receiving the property for the amount that they bid, which is usually just the taxes. So I'm not sure if I'm totally answering your question, but I've taken this tax foreclosure process and the auction process there, and I've said, what if you thought about it strategically inside your housing context? And that's...
So essentially, the county would be putting up a bid for that house.
Yes, and I don't know what Forsyth County does right now.
I've never heard of that, but
But
where would we
do
get
not.
the money?
We don't have money right now unless the board decides that's, something in our budget we want to do, but we currently do not bid on tax foreclosures.
That's what was confusing me, right? I had never.
Yeah.
So we would have to have our own money from our budget to buy.
to bid on those tax foreclosure properties.
I'll just add that in the past, say 10 years ago, the county would bid on, I believe, almost all foreclosure properties. What happened was we ended up winning quite a few of those, and then we had vacant properties that just sat around. And so I'm not saying that's something we might not want to do. We just have to be strategic about it and make sure we don't end up with, junky properties that we don't do anything with.
Thank you so much for being here today, Mr. Mulligan. We've appreciated your information mostly.
I can't wait to hear what you did not appreciate.
That's okay. But thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. Okay. Ms. Manager, our next discussion item, if you want to do it, is legislative goals.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Mulligan, for being here. What I will say, just to kind of close the loop on that conversation, this context is going to be important as the board decides, just from a policy perspective, what you want staff to do or not do. And so certainly we'll have a follow-up. This was a lot of information, but we'll have a follow-up at some point to try to get board direction. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Our next discussion item is just as exciting. It's our proposed legislative goals. This is a long list, but our point was really just to try to put together some staff thoughts around proposed state goals prior to the General Assembly going into short session, which will be in April. And then also, most importantly, is federal goals, because we are going to be going to the National Association of Counties next week, and we'll be meeting with our federal legislators. And so our hope is to get your feedback. We will kind of in between the meetings try to do some rankings like we did last year and bring back to you finalized, specifically on the state. But today I'm hoping to get some clear direction on federal as well. And if there's anything we're missing, certainly let us know. So our plan today is to do really quick, about 1 minute snapshots of each area, and I'll call different staff up to lead the discussion. The first few items are going to be led by Deputy County Manager Denise Price, and I'll ask her to come up and review her items.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So I'm going to review very quickly items 1 through 4. The first is Food and Nutrition Services, or F&S administrative funding. Beginning October the 1st, 2026, the reduction of federal reimbursement for F&S, or SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program as it's known federally, shifts from 50% to 25%. Locally, that means that our revenue will decrease by almost $2 million per year. The second is Medicaid expansion, redetermination, frequency, and work requirements. Beginning January 1st, 2027, there will be significant changes reshaping how Medicaid expansion operates and what we must implement community in regards to community engagement and work requirements for expansion adults. It requires approximately 80 hours of work, job training, education, or community service per month. This shifts the annual recertification also to a biannual process. So every 6 months, there will be a redetermination. This is coupled with a reduction in reimbursement, moving from 75% to 50%, resulting in a loss of revenue at the same time that we're increasing the administrative responsibilities. The recommendation is to seek state funding in the amount of $158,750 annually, representing that 25% gap between federal reimbursement and the expected lower level for community engagement requirements. And then third is Special Assistance Program expansion, which contextually, it's about our in-home and special assistance Medicaid. The Special Assistance Program is designed to help low-income older adults, people with disabilities, and legally blind individuals pay for long-term care needs and age in place in their homes. A monthly cash supplement to eligible individuals helps cover the cost of non-institutional care. With appropriate care, many individuals are able to safely live in their home. The cost share for the state is roughly a 50-50 split with local, and the program changes in FY24 removed caps to this program, which has resulted in us seeing significantly larger numbers of people, increasing county costs to about $500,000 a year. The fourth item is funding to support additional innovations waiver slots and reducing our wait times. There's a significant wait list for innovation slots locally and statewide. Slots support individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the community, reducing their need for more restrictive and higher levels of care. Locally, there are over 1,000 residents on the wait list. Their average age is 22 years old, and individuals wait an average of almost 8 years from the time that they are placed on the wait list until they are issued a slot. Each budget slot represents $184,000, which can be used on an individualized basis to best meet the needs of the individual and keep them out of higher levels of care. Be happy to answer any questions, and Krista Smith is also here in the audience to address any DSS-related questions.
Yes, Denise, I do have questions. I do have comments, but I will keep them to myself right now relative to the big, beautiful bill. What I will say, or what I will ask is, have we provided any plans in place to support the work requirements relative to the job training, education, and community service?
I'll let Krista speak to that.
So at this time, we know what is in HR 1, but the state provides the policy framework for how that needs to roll out. So we are on hold waiting for them to roll out the policy of how we need to enact that to make any particular staffing or resource requests there.
Do they plan on providing us funding surrounding the support for those items?
It's my understanding there is some discussion in relation to that in terms of the state budget, but there's nothing definitive that has come out yet.
So this is implemented in 2027, and there's no concrete plans for,
At this point in time, absent it being in the budget, it's an unfunded mandate.
okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I do have what I think is a related question. I just heard yesterday about the potential loss of staff positions in DSS, or, our Department of Social Services, having to do with the changes in Medicaid eligibility mandated in the Big Ugly Bill.
So we're not discussing any at the county level, and I'm not aware, that may have been in reference to the state level, but I haven't heard anything in reference to that.
I'll need to follow up. Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions?
Madam Chairperson, were any of these issues discussed at the recent board meeting of the NCACC? Okay. Just checking.
In depth.
Okay.
The next item will be briefed by our County Attorney Gordon Watkins, and this is in reference to proposed property tax changes.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. And this was definitely discussed at the NCACC meeting. At the end of last year, the North Carolina House of Representatives formed what they call the House Select Committee on Property Tax Reduction and Reform to study local government property taxes, both municipalities and counties. And within the last week, the state Senate has done the same thing. The Senate's leader, the quote from the office was they want to, quote, consider policy proposals to rein in the runaway property tax practices being implemented across the state. Correct. So as you see, very loaded language there. The general foundation of property tax law in North Carolina is that citizens owning equal property should pay equal taxes in general, with a few exceptions. And also that the local government should decide what is the priority to spend locally. This would affect both of those by, there have been proposals to greatly expand exemptions. There have been proposals to either freeze the value of a property so your property wouldn't change in value until you sold it, or put a cap, say it could only go up 3% each year. Which, if in a vacuum it sounds great, but then you end up with somebody who owns a property for 30 years paying a fraction of what someone who just bought the property next door would pay. And also that would severely limit the property taxes that we rely on. Property taxes are about 59% of Forsyth County's budget. So, and it's the only tax that we can directly, unilaterally control. It's worth noting that with the recent revow, our property tax rate is 22 cents lower than it was in fiscal year 20, and it's the lowest it's been since 1989. So our tax rate is very low. I just looked, and we're 64th of the 100 counties in terms of tax rate. So, but that's just Forsyth County. This is across the state, and I feel like this is one that the NCACC is certainly going to be taking a lead on, but we need to be careful to lend our voice too, because this really would impact on what you as a board can do going forward. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, I'll just say that was certainly discussed all weekend, and NCACC is doing a wonderful job reaching out to our delegations, but they did stress that it has to be talked about locally, and we have to emphasize the danger of losing our right to property tax, and we need to be talking to our citizens and let them know what they stand to lose. I think folks still do not realize all the services that the county provides, and when they put restrictions on our property tax, that affects our services. So I hope we can meet with our delegation one-on-one or either as a group and emphasize what this will do. Even though there are 33 folks in the legislature who were former county commissioners, apparently they have forgotten everything they know about property tax. So
And-
we
and-
need to do our homework here with our group.
And it's important to note and to emphasize not only, the county money or city money, but think of the organizations that you fund, of course, education, sheriffs,
Right.
and registered deeds, those things. So they are certainly also reliant on you as a board being able to collect property taxes.
Correct.
I'd like to just piggyback on something that Commissioner Wizen had talked about. Although this is being addressed and it could possibly come into fruition, are there any thoughts around giving the schools taxing authority so that they can take that out of the hands of the county commissioners? Or maybe each county having their own decisions around that?
I've not heard that. That is done in some other states.
Gloria, did you have any?
That was not discussed, but personally, I don't think that the legislators would buy in anybody else having taxing authority. I think they're more concerned about the ones that we don't have taxing authority.
Yeah, I'm just thinking through, we supported the school systems at a record high of $180 million and what this would do to their budgets if this was to come to pass. But anyway, something to consider and think about. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I would like to say that I agree with what Commissioner McDaniel is saying. I think that the state would be wise to kind of study how it is done, maybe in other states when the school district has the authority to tax, and to look at the pros and cons of that so that then there isn't the drama that I think a lot of counties in North Carolina face because the school district says they don't get enough money from the county. Then it will all be on them and the citizens to determine that dollar versus it coming through the county. And so I think that is not unheard of. Other states do it, and I think it's more of an ideological piece than it is best practice.
I would just add to that sometimes we have to be careful what we ask for, because that might be an invitation for the state to fund less at the state level and push more funding to the local level. And it could result in very inequitable situations where a rich area can fund their schools and a poor area cannot.
Yeah, that's why I said we probably need to study it before we went down the path to kind of see the pros and cons of it.
I just wanted to have a comment. It's short, but for any media that's, either listening in live or listening to the recordings of our briefing discussion today, they need to understand so that they can let the public know that the legislature is talking about serious restrictions on counties' property tax authority that could result in major cuts to our local public school system and major cuts to our law enforcement through the sheriff's department. So if people want poorer public schools or, longer wait times and less responsiveness when they call the sheriff's department for help, then this is an effort that they may want to support to restrict counties' property tax authority. If they don't like that, then they need to let their state legislators know that this is not a move that they support.
Well, all of our county services would be affected, and I do think that we need to do a better job of letting our citizens know exactly what we do for them and what their property tax are spent on. So that's something we need to work on in the future. Further questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you. The agenda, well, not agenda item, but the number 6 on the proposed legislative goals is the Cure Violence Program for Scythe Winds, which I'll briefly just remind you, this is the evidence-based model that we have been funding previously with the city. This last year, the county fully funded it. This is something that we are still needing to need continued funds to support. We were able to get a grant from the Governor's Crime Commission of about $250,000. We're waiting for them to finalize that per year for 2 years, but the program cost about $500,000 total to run. And so certainly having state support to continue this program while we are continuing to look for grant opportunities would be very helpful. But I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
Questions?
Okay. The next items will be briefed by Deputy County Manager Kyle Haney.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mark Davidson, our airport director, is in the back if you have any detailed questions about this, but I will just review the next two items, which are both financial capital requests. We have a couple facilities at Smith Reynolds Airport that have some significant aging. The first one here is our Emeraro hangar at 4001 North Liberty Street. It was constructed in 1969 and currently is leased to Emeraro Holdings, who was formerly North State Aviation. It's a large employer in our area, over 350 jobs on site, and just has significant capital needs. There was a facilities study done in 2020. It identified the replacement value of the facility at $51 million. However, significant capital needs for systems and actually structural issues out there. We did receive a grant from the Economic Development Administration, the Federal Economic Development Administration, which is going to be completed, which covered about $6 million of improvements, but they're substantial beyond that. So the request here was really around capital funding at a level of $11.5 million for that facility. Across the street from that, there is another hangar that was built in 1953. It hosts a number of different companies in there, another employment center, which also has seen significant deterioration. The 2020 study also looked at that and identified several capital items. There are some ongoing capital improvements, but certainly there's more needs, and so there's a request of about $4 million for that one.
Any questions in regards to airport projects? Okay. 9 and 10 are actually from our elections director, Tim Suji. He's not able to be here today. But 9 is in regards to needing an update to the Rural Hall town charter. Because they've moved to partisan municipal elections and even-numbered years, it is creating some issues in terms of deadlines for the Board of Elections. I did ask our elections director to reach out to Rural Hall because I do think it's something that needs to be led by the municipality, and he does plan on doing that. But he did want to raise this level to the board as we're looking at legislative items as well. He just gave the example that with the general election petition deadlines would be September 18th, but absentees have to go out September 7th, and so it makes it very challenging for any unaffiliated candidates. And then number 10 is a bill to address appointment of replacement candidates. This came up due to one of the Kernersville aldermen who passed away during the election process. We had a whole lot of iterations of what was going to happen. Ultimately, they found some resolution, but what he's saying is the statute really needs to change. So this is something that the Board of Elections would like us to lift up in order to have a permanent solution for when this type of circumstance happens. Any questions on that? If you have more, certainly can have Tim Suji here next time. But pretty straightforward. Next items, I'm going to turn back to Deputy County Manager Kyle Haney.
All right. Another capital request here for the construction of an emergency operations center for Winston-Salem and Forsyth County. Currently, Forsyth County does not have a dedicated emergency operations center, so this is a real-time facility that's, in the case of an emergency, already set up for public safety officials to come in and monitor that emergency. The county does have a cold facility, so it is sharing a room at the Public Safety Center with the Sheriff's Department that uses for training. And so if there was an emergency, we would have to bring in technology and set that up. This is a priority for the city, they've indicated too, and it's going to be on their legislative requests as well. But this would provide, we're requesting $1 million to construct that at the Public Safety Center between where Emergency Management already has an office and our 911 center. So there's a vacant space there that this could be constructed in.
Questions? Thank you, Kyle.
And then the last one that I have here is around the old SciWorks facility. This is a property that we've talked about for a long time here. This is not a monetary ask, but it is a policy advocacy ask. So as the board's familiar with, there is a deed restriction, a land water conservation fund deed restriction on that property that requires that parcel to be used for outdoor recreation. Staff's been working on the long process to try to remove that deed restriction, which requires us to purchase additional and put that restriction on additional land for park use, for outdoor recreation use. We have submitted a request through the state to the National Park Service. We have a plan. It is really up to them deciding what the replacement value is we're going to be required to be to meet the total $8 million that the assessment, the appraisal was at. There's just a significant barrier to that and the amount of land you'd have to acquire. And so we did come up with a plan that the state parks supports. They're advocating to the federal government to value this at only the land value, which is around $4 million. And so this is really around asking the federal government to decide that it's only that $4 million and not the $8 million.
Questions?
And that's really all of our items. The last 13 is other federal impacts, which is just a few more talking points about HR 1, which is similar to what Deputy County Manager Denise Price briefed earlier. And so what I would say is for us, in terms of federal, the ones that really stick out is the SciWorks. Our legislators, their liaisons are always reaching out to us asking how they can help. So from our perspective, this seems like it could be an easy lift, an easy ask when we go to DC. So we would like to do a more fancy write-up on that for our legislators. And then I think our other question would be, what other items would the board like to address during our federal legislative visit next week? Well, really, it's in almost 2 weeks, but when we go to Washington, D.C. Most of the other items are state items, and so we'd like you to rank your top 3, and we'll get that from you separately. You don't have to do that during this meeting, but what we would really like is direction on what you would like us to discuss when we head to D.C. In a week and a half.
Okay. Questions? I think we can do that. Have it ready by Thursday. Okay, I will turn the meeting over to you, Ms. County Manager.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Okay. The agenda items that we will brief today are for our Thursday, February 12th meeting. Agenda item number 1 is approval of minutes for the meeting of January 29th. Madam Clerk, have those been emailed? Yes, they have been. Thank you. Agenda item number 2 is an amendment to the fiscal year 26 budget ordinance to reconcile the medication-assisted treatment grant in the Sheriff's Office budget and an amendment to the Sheriff's Public Safety Grants Project Ordinance to accept a transfer from the general fund for the medication-assisted treatment grant. Kimberly Bussey, our Deputy Budget Director, will brief this item.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. You might remember in 2023, in September of that year, Commissioners voted to approve a grant for the Sheriff's Office in the amount of $388,884. This is for a medication-assisted treatment, or MAT, program in our jail. Since then, or I guess just last November, the Sheriff's Office got notification that they were going to extend that grant for another year, which is good news. The reason I'm here today is, you might remember I've come to you the last couple years with a similar item, in that we every year budget what we think the Sheriff's Office is going to spend on this grant, and then we wait to see what they spend between about now and the end of the fiscal year, and then I come back to you and we shore up this grant to make sure that the Sheriff's Office has the full budget so they can spend on this grant. So that's why I'm here. That's agenda, or Section A of this agenda item. That's what it does. A brief note, I did check the spending level this morning. It's a little bit different than what you see on your agenda item, and I've let the clerk know, and we'll have that changed for Thursday. But as a note of this $388,000 grant, in the last few years, they have spent, instead of that $70,000, they've spent $81,582. So that will change the number that you'll see on Section A. Right now, it's listed at appropriating $193,000. We're going to appropriate $181,000. Again, we'll have those numbers updated for you for next week. The other reason I'm here is Section B is we're going to take that newly appropriated reconciled grant, and we're going to move those funds from the general fund over to Sheriff's Grant Project Ordinance. Since it's been extended a year, those funds being in this different fund will allow them to roll over easily, and I won't have to come to you again next year to shore up the grant. So that's the request. And again, those numbers will change slightly since the spend has changed, but we'll get that updated. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, it says this is for the Vivitrol injections, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I know they last longer. I know they're very effective, and they're quite expensive. Does that mean these are given in lieu of other less expensive therapies like Suboxone or buprenorphine?
So we do have someone for the Sheriff's Office here to answer specific questions about the grant, but I'm not even sure if he'll know that. If not, we can get you some information on it.
The allowances under the grant have expanded to a lot of different medications that we can offer to inmates. I'm not sure of the specific ones that you've asked for, but we can try to get that from the providers.
Okay, that and any other alternative therapies. Thank you.
Further questions?
Agenda item number 3 is a resolution authorizing execution of an agreement with Wake Forest University Baptist Medical Center for mammography screening, chest x-ray, and diagnostic services. Camilla Pleasance, our Assistant Public Health Director, will brief this item.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. The Forsyth County Department of Public Health received $35,900 from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Cancer Protection and Control, to provide breast and cervical cancer screenings for low-income women that are defined as below 250% of the federal poverty level. If necessary, the Department of Public Health may refer patients to other healthcare providers for further diagnostic services. This agreement with Wake Forest University Baptist Medical Center provides mammography and chest x-ray screening and diagnostic services outlined under AA 452. This agreement is not to exceed $65,000, with $35,900 funded from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services funds, and $29,100 from the County Department of Public Health's budgeted funds. Answer any questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Agenda item number 4 is a resolution authorizing the execution of a contract with Dell Marketing Limited Partnership to provide Microsoft subscription and software services. Michaela Westbrook, the MIS Department Business Manager, will brief this item.
Good afternoon. So this this item would award a contract to Dell to provide Microsoft software and services to our county departments. It's a 3-year contract with each year totaling $1,113,131.78 per year.
Questions?
Oh, they have 4 languages listed. I saw that. How much Portuguese is involved?
Only for those who prefer that language.
Okay, and how many is that?
None that I'm aware of.
Falo and pouco de português?
Absolutely not.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 5 is Ms. Westbrook's as well. It's a resolution authorizing execution of an agreement with Level Solutions Group, LLC, for purchase of endpoint computing technology for the Forsyth County Department of Social Services.
Okay, so every year, MIS budgets and plans for the replacement of a certain number of items in our technology fleet. So this item awards a contract to Level Solutions Group to replace laptops, computer cases, keyboards, mouses, and monitors for a total of $326.96.
Questions?
Thank you.
Agenda item number 7 is a resolution accepting real property located at 0 Balsam Road. Chelsea Swaim, our Deputy General Services Director, will brief this item.
Number 6.
I'll come back to 6, I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This item is to approve acceptance of donation of real property at 0 Balsam Road in Pofftown. The current owners, Michael Lynch, Alan Fletcher, Deborah Fletcher, and Gerald Fletcher, wish to donate this .11 acre piece of property to the county as they have no need for it. It's a leftover parcel that is left over from the Timberfield development. And this property does adjoin already owned property by the county, which is used as CG Hill Park. And Parks and Rec staff have been on site and they've inspected the property and they would recommend accepting it. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have, and Parks and Rec is here as well if you have specifics for them.
Questions?
Do we know what the tax value is on that?
Yes, I do. It is $2,800.
Thank you. We want to tell them thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, please convey to this group of guys that we appreciate this.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Agenda item number 6, sorry about that, Jonathan, is a resolution awarding and authorizing execution of a purchase order to Modern Chevrolet LLC for the purchase of 5 vehicles, and a resolution awarding and authorizing execution of a purchase order to Nashville Automotive, doing business as Sierra Chevrolet Buick GMC, for the purchase of 11 vehicles. Jonathan Markle, our Automotive Services Manager, will brief this item.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. The first item is a purchase of 5 Chevrolet Equinox EVs. So we purchased 3 EVs last year. Those have been rolled out across the county to 3 different departments. We're looking to expand this with 5 additional EVs to fill up the charging stations that the county has purchased and built. So this is 5 vehicles. They were submitted through City County Purchasing for bid that closed on January 5th. 5 responsive bidders were received, and Modern Chevrolet was the lowest at $25,090 apiece. In addition to that, we are looking at one additional option on the vehicles that was not included in the bid. It's $265.93 per vehicle to expand charging capabilities. So this would be a total of $25,355.95 per vehicle, total not to exceed of $126,779.65. And these are 5 replacement vehicles for the motor pool that would be used on a daily basis. Happy to answer any questions there.
Question?
Just one, these are pure plug-in EVs, not hybrids?
Correct.
Okay,
That is correct.
thank you.
Okay, so I saw all the reference to charging ports, and you mentioned the other supplement. So charging stations are not included or required?
So we have 8 charging stations that the county has built, 4 here on the 5th floor, and then 4 over at the Health and Human Services campus. So this would maximize the 8 charging stations that we have in operation for 8 vehicles. The additional option is to be able to use public charging stations, similar to the Tesla chargers and others. So we would be able to use those, this $265 option. I missed that on the original spec and didn't include it, so I was just catching that up and correcting it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The second bid was for 11 vehicles. This is 3 different specifications of vehicles. 5 of them are going to be a Chevrolet Trax small subcompact SUV. 5 of them are for a Chevrolet Trailblazer all-wheel drive SUV, and 1 is for a 1-ton crew cab pickup truck chassis, and that will be going to Parks and Rec. The other 10 vehicles are replacements for motor pool vehicles across the county. Total not to exceed of $297,345 for those 11 vehicles.
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda items 8 and 9 are our tax refunds. 8 is a refund by the tax assessor collector in the amount of $6,728.14, and 9 is in the amount of $12,055.79. And then agenda item number 10 is a resolution acknowledging receipt of the tax collector's report of the total amount of unpaid 2025 taxes that are liens on real property, and ordering the tax collector to advertise such liens. Amanda Markle, our tax assessor collector, will brief this item.
Okay, so the item before you is, of course, our annual advertisement of our tax liens for 2025. You will notice in the report that you've been provided, there is just over 15,000 real estate accounts that had unpaid taxes as of this past Monday, not today, but a week ago. On the bright side, we are now just under 15,000. So it has gone down greatly in the next week. Within the past week, even with all the weather that we've had. But this item will allow us to advertise. It is set per statute. Our plan would be to send a notice to all of our taxpayers, giving them 30 days to pay and notifying them that they would be advertised in the month of April. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Thank you.
Agenda items 11 and 12 are our reports. 11 is the Lowe's Home Centers 2021 Property Tax Commission Appeal Resolution Order, and 12 is the Partners Health Management Quarterly Report. And that's all of our agenda items. Madam Vice Chair, I see Commissioner Bessie may have a question.
I just had one question. The location of the Lowe's property, is that the Haynesville Boulevard? Sorry.
I knew I should have stayed up here. This is actually for all of Lowe's properties. It's 7 different properties. So this is all 7 properties owned by Lowe's Home Improvement.
Okay, thank you.
So for clarification for me, I'm sorry. It appears that the order, was this because of a statute of limitation situation?
No, this was actually based off of an appeal from the 2021 reappraisal year.
Okay.
So they appealed all of their values in 2021 to the Board of Equalization and Review. They were not happy with that value, so then they appealed to the Property Tax Commission. So we have finally settled that 2021 appeal
Okay,
for
fair enough.
all 7 of their properties.
All right, thank you. That was helpful.
I just have a closed session motion.
Right.
I need to ask the board to consider a motion to go into closed session to discuss a matter relating to the location or expansion of industries or other businesses in the area served by the public body, including agreement on a tentative list of economic development incentives that may be offered by the public body in negotiations pursuant to the provisions of North Carolina General Statutes 143-318.11A4. And since there's no other business to come before the board at this meeting, following the closed session, the meeting will be adjourned.
We don't need a motion for that. Oh, we do need a motion. Motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Bessie. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.